On September 24, 2024, an Israeli soldier named Shamir died for a brief moment on the battlefield. What he experienced in those fleeting moments between life and death would change him forever. From a heavenly city of light to a hellish realm of torment, Shamir's journey through the afterlife revealed a truth so terrifying it challenges our very understanding of existence. But Shamir's story doesn't end there. His encounter with a figure of light, whom he recognized as Jesus, brought him face to face with the true meaning of peace and forgiveness. As we delve into Shamir's extraordinary account, prepare to question everything you thought you knew about life, death, and the consequences of our actions. Shamir's journey as an Israeli Defense Forces soldier began with a burning passion to serve his country. From the moment he enlisted, Shamir threw himself into his training with unwavering dedication. His superiors quickly took notice of his exceptional skills and unyielding commitment to excellence. Shamir's days were filled with rigorous physical training, tactical exercises, and weapons drills. He absorbed every lesson, every strategy, determined to become the best soldier he could be. As Shamir rose through the ranks, his reputation for loyalty and efficiency grew. He became known as a soldier who could be counted on to follow orders without hesitation. His fellow soldiers admired his focus and determination, often looking to him for guidance in difficult situations. Shamir's unwavering dedication to his duties seemed to be the very embodiment of what it meant to be a soldier in the Israeli Defense Forces. Yet beneath the surface of Shamir's steadfast exterior, a subtle conflict began to stir. As he participated in more operations and witnessed the harsh realities of combat, questions started to form in the recesses of his mind. The line between right and wrong, once so clear in his training, began to blur in the fog of war. Shamir found himself grappling with the moral implications of certain orders, even as he continued to carry them out with precision. This internal struggle is not uncommon among soldiers. The military culture of unquestioning obedience, while necessary for effective operations, can create a profound psychological burden. Soldiers are trained to trust their superiors implicitly, to believe that every order serves a greater purpose. But what happens when that trust is tested? When the consequences of those orders become all too real and personal? The psychological impact of combat on soldiers like Shamir is well documented. The constant state of hypervigilance, the adrenaline surges, and the weight of life or death decisions can take a tremendous toll on the human psyche. Many soldiers experience a form of moral injury, a deep wound to the soul that occurs when actions in war violate one's fundamental beliefs about right and wrong. For Shamir, this internal conflict reached a crescendo during a covert operation in a disputed territory. His unit was tasked with neutralizing a suspected terrorist cell, but intelligence on civilian presence in the area was unclear. As Shamir prepared for the mission, the doubts he had been suppressing bubbled to the surface. What if there were innocent lives at stake? Could he live with the consequences if things went wrong? The tension mounted as Shamir and his team approached their target. The weight of his weapon felt heavier than usual, each step forward a battle between duty and conscience. In those moments, Shamir stood at a crossroads, his military training pulling him in one direction, his moral compass in another. As the operation unfolded, Shamir faced a pivotal decision. His commanding officer gave the order to engage, despite the lingering uncertainty about civilian presence. In that split second, Shamir had to choose between following orders and potentially saving his fellow soldiers' lives, or hesitating and risking the mission's failure. With a deep breath, Shamir made his choice. He followed the order, his training taking over as he moved with deadly precision. The operation was deemed a success by military standards, but the cost would haunt Shamir for years to come. The controversial nature of the order and its consequences would become a turning point in Shamir's military career and his life. Little did Shamir know that this decision would set in motion a chain of events leading to that fateful day on September 24th, 2024. As he continued to serve, the weight of his actions grew heavier, setting the stage for an experience that would challenge everything he thought he knew about duty, morality, and the very nature of existence. The weight of a single bullet can change the course of history. For Alad Shamir, that weight felt immeasurable as he crouched in the shadows, his finger poised on the trigger of his rifle. The air around him crackled with tension, thick with the acrid smell of gunpowder and the metallic tang of fear. This operation was unlike any other he had experienced in his years of service. The intelligence had been clear. A high-value target was hiding in the sprawling compound before them. But as Shamir surveyed the scene, doubt gnawed at the edges of his resolve. The compound was eerily quiet, save for the distant sound of children playing. Could their intel have been wrong? Were innocent lives at stake? Shamir's heart raced, pounding against his ribcage with such force he feared it might give away his position. This physiological response, a surge of adrenaline flooding his system, was his body's way of preparing for the life or death decision that lay before him. Time seemed to slow, each second stretching into an eternity as he grappled with the weight of his orders. In these crucial moments, Shamir's training battled against his conscience. He had been taught to trust his superiors implicitly, to believe that every order served a greater purpose. Yet, the faces of civilians he had encountered in previous operations flashed before his eyes, a stark reminder of the human cost of war. The psychological impact of combat, the constant state of hypervigilance, and the burden of life or death decisions had taken their toll on Shamir's psyche. As he prepared to carry out his orders, Shamir felt the full weight of moral injury bearing down upon him. This deep wound to the soul, born from actions that violate one's fundamental beliefs about right and wrong, threatened to tear him apart. He knew that whatever decision he made in the next few moments would haunt him for the rest of his life. The radio crackled to life, his commander's voice cutting through the silence. "Target confirmed. You have clearance to engage." Shamir's finger tightened on the trigger, his breath caught in his throat. In that split second, time stood still. The laughter of children echoed in the distance, a chilling counterpoint to the gravity of the moment. With a deep breath, Shamir made his choice. The crack of his rifle shattered the uneasy quiet, the bullet finding its mark with deadly precision. But as the echo of the shot faded, chaos erupted. The compound came alive with the staccato of gunfire and the screams of the wounded. Shamir moved with practiced efficiency, his training taking over as he sought cover. But in the midst of the firefight, something unexpected happened. A searing pain exploded in his chest, spreading through his body like wildfire. He had been hit. As Shamir fell to the ground, he found himself fighting not to survive, but to stay conscious. The world around him became a blur of sound and motion, the chaotic battlefield filled with screams and gunfire. His senses, heightened by the trauma, made each moment feel elongated and distorted. In those final moments of consciousness, Shamir's mind raced. The weight of his actions, the lives he had taken and the choices he had made, all crashed down upon him. As darkness began to encroach on the edges of his vision, he wondered if this was how it would end. Would his last act in this world be one of violence? As Shamir's eyes fluttered closed, he felt himself slipping away. The cacophony of battle faded, replaced by an eerie silence. Little did he know that this moment, this transition between life and death, would be the beginning of a journey that would challenge everything he thought he knew about existence, duty, and the true nature of reality. As the darkness enveloped Alad Shamir, something extraordinary began to unfold. The searing pain in his chest suddenly vanished, replaced by an inexplicable lightness. In that moment, Shamir experienced a sensation so profound and otherworldly that it defied all rational explanation. He felt himself separating from his physical form, as if his essence were gently lifting away from the broken body that lay on the battlefield. Confusion washed over Shamir as he found himself suspended in the air, looking down at the chaotic scene below. The surreal nature of this experience left him reeling, unable to comprehend what was happening. He could see his own body, bloodied and motionless, surrounded by his fellow soldiers frantically trying to save him. Yet here he was, somehow observing it all from above, detached from the physical realm he had always known. The battlefield, once a cacophony of gunfire and screams, now seemed oddly muted. Shamir watched in awe as the frantic movements of soldiers and medics unfolded beneath him, their actions appearing almost choreographed from this new vantage point. The gravity of the situation struck him anew as he witnessed the desperate attempts to revive his physical form. This phenomenon, known as an out-of-body experience, OBE, is a hallmark of many near-death experiences. Shamir's account aligns closely with countless others who have reported similar sensations during moments of extreme physical trauma. "I felt myself separating from my body," Shamir would later recount. "It was as if I was suspended in the air, watching the battlefield from above." The neuroscience behind such experiences remains a subject of intense study and debate. Some researchers propose that OBEs are the result of the brain's attempt to make sense of the extreme stress and oxygen deprivation that occur during near-death states. Others suggest that these experiences point to a consciousness that can exist independently of the physical body, challenging our fundamental understanding of the nature of reality and human consciousness. As Shamir grappled with the surreal nature of his situation, he became aware of a subtle shift in his perception. The battlefield below began to fade, its harsh reality giving way to something far more mysterious and profound. A sense of peace washed over him, unlike anything he had ever experienced in his tumultuous life as a soldier. Suddenly, Shamir felt a gentle but insistent pull. His attention was drawn away from the fading scene of the battlefield to a phenomenon that both thrilled and terrified him. A tunnel of light began to materialize before him, its entrance beckoning with an otherworldly radiance. "I realized my soul was being drawn into a tunnel," Shamir later described. "The tunnel was dark but not frightening. It was quiet and peaceful. The tunnel seemed to promise a journey beyond the physical realm into territories unknown and uncharted by human understanding. As Shamir found himself drawn towards its entrance, a mix of anticipation and trepidation filled his being. What lay beyond this threshold? What truths awaited him in the depths of this mysterious passageway? With each moment, Shamir felt himself moving further from the world he had known, the battlefield and its horrors receding into the distance. With every step, I felt further removed from my body and my past. The war and the pain were gone, he would later recall. The tunnel of light seemed to offer a transition, a passage from the harsh realities of his earthly existence to something beyond comprehension. As Shamir crossed the threshold into the tunnel, he embarked on the next phase of his otherworldly journey. Little did he know that this was merely the beginning of an experience that would challenge everything he thought he knew about life, death, and the nature of reality itself. As Alad Shamir emerged from the tunnel of light, he found himself standing at the threshold of a realm that defied earthly description. A majestic city stretched out before him, its structures gleaming with a golden radiance that seemed to emanate from within. The air itself shimmered with an otherworldly luminescence, casting everything in a soft, ethereal glow. Shamir's breath caught in his throat as he took in the breathtaking beauty of this celestial landscape. The city pulsed with an energy that Shamir had never experienced before. It was as if every molecule of this place vibrated with life and purpose. The colors here were more vivid than anything he had ever seen on Earth, each hue so intense it almost hurt to look at. Shamir felt a wave of overwhelming peace wash over him, erasing the memories of battle and bloodshed that had haunted him for so long. As he stepped further into this heavenly realm, Shamir was struck by a profound sense of belonging. It was as if this place had been waiting for him, welcoming him home after a long and arduous journey. The weight of his earthly responsibilities, the guilt of his past actions, all seemed to melt away in the face of this transcendent beauty. Yet, as Shamir wandered through the gleaming streets, a subtle unease began to creep into his consciousness. At first, it was nothing more than a fleeting thought, easily dismissed in the face of such splendor. But as he continued to explore, the feeling grew stronger. Something about this paradise felt off. The perfection of the city began to take on an almost artificial quality. The golden light, once warm and comforting, now seemed to hide something beneath its brilliant surface. Shamir noticed that despite the vastness of the city, he hadn't encountered a single other soul. The silence, once peaceful, now felt oppressive. As Shamir's unease grew, he began to notice other discordant elements. A strange chill crept into the air, at odds with the warm glow that surrounded him. The faint scent of decay wafted on the breeze, barely perceptible but undeniably present. These subtle shifts in his perception felt like cracks in a carefully constructed facade. The psychological impact of this experience was profound. Shamir's mind struggled to reconcile the initial feelings of peace and belonging with the growing sense of wrongness. This internal conflict mirrored the complex nature of near-death experiences reported across cultures. While many accounts speak of heavenly realms and overwhelming peace, others describe a gradual transition to more challenging or even terrifying visions. Research suggests that these experiences may be the brain's attempt to create comforting imagery in the face of trauma, a psychological defense mechanism against the fear of death. Yet the shifting nature of Shamir's vision seemed to hint at deeper truths, perhaps reflecting his own internal struggles with morality and the consequences of his actions. As Shamir grappled with these conflicting sensations, the very fabric of the heavenly city began to waver. The golden light flickered, revealing glimpses of something darker lurking beneath the surface. The beautiful structures around him started to crumble, their perfect facades giving way to reveal a more ominous reality. With a mixture of fear and fascination, Shamir watched as the city of light transformed before his eyes. The once radiant realm dissolved, replaced by a landscape that chilled him to his core. Gone were the gleaming streets and ethereal beauty. In their place, Shamir found himself standing at the edge of a vast, foreboding labyrinth. The transition was jarring, leaving Shamir reeling from the sudden shift in his surroundings. As he gazed into the depths of the maze that now stretched out before him, he realized that his journey through the afterlife was far from over. In fact, it seemed that the true test of his soul was only just beginning. The labyrinth loomed before Shamir, its twisting corridors stretching into darkness. Gone was the golden city of light, replaced by a maze of cold stone and shifting shadows. As he took his first tentative steps into this new realm, a sense of suffocation gripped him. The walls seemed to close in, their rough surfaces scraping against his skin as he navigated the narrow passages. With each turn, Shamir's fear grew. The corridors shifted and changed, defying logic and reason. He found himself retracing his steps, only to discover that familiar paths had vanished, replaced by new and unfamiliar routes. The maze seemed alive, toying with him, stripping away his sense of direction and control. As Shamir pressed on, he became acutely aware of a transformation taking place within himself. His military uniform, once a symbol of strength and authority, began to disintegrate. Piece by piece, his physical defenses fell away, leaving him feeling exposed and vulnerable. This stripping away wasn't just physical. Shamir felt his emotional barriers crumbling as well. The carefully constructed walls he had built around his heart and mind began to crumble, leaving him raw and defenseless. The symbolism of the labyrinth wasn't lost on Shamir. In many spiritual traditions, mazes represent a journey of self-discovery, a path to confront one's deepest fears and truths. As he navigated the twisting corridors, Shamir felt as though he were traversing the complex landscape of his own psyche, each turn revealing another layer of his soul. The psychological impact of this experience was profound. Stripped of his defenses, Shamir found himself grappling with a deep-seated fear of the unknown. The maze forced him to confront his vulnerability, challenging his perception of control and security. This state of exposure, while terrifying, also opened him up to a level of self-awareness he had never before experienced. As Shamir delved deeper into the labyrinth, the atmosphere grew increasingly oppressive. The air thickened, making each breath a struggle. Strange whispers echoed through the corridors, carrying fragments of memories and long-buried regrets. Shamir recognized voices from his past, comrades lost in battle, civilians caught in the crossfire of war. Their words, once ignored or forgotten, now resonated with painful clarity. The anticipation of what awaited him at the end of this twisted path filled Shamir with dread. Each step forward felt like a step closer to judgment, to a reckoning he both feared and, on some level, knew he needed to face. The weight of his past actions, the lives he had taken, the orders he had followed without question, all of it pressed down upon him with increasing intensity. As Shamir rounded what felt like the 1,000th corner, he suddenly found himself at the edge of a vast, fiery abyss. The maze had led him to this precipice, a yawning chasm that glowed with an infernal light. Heat rose in waves, searing his skin and stealing his breath. Shamir stood transfixed, realizing that his journey through the labyrinth had been a prelude to something far more terrifying. The abyss before him represented more than just a physical danger. It was a gateway to the consequences of his actions, a portal through which he would have to confront the true impact of his life as a soldier. As Shamir gazed into the fiery depths, he understood that his real trial was only just beginning. The labyrinth had stripped him of his defenses, leaving him bare and vulnerable before the judgment that awaited him in the inferno below. As Shamir descended into the fiery abyss, he found himself in a realm that defied his darkest nightmares. The landscape before him was a hellish panorama of flames and torment, stretching as far as the eye could see. Shamir's senses were overwhelmed by the oppressive heat and the cacophony of agonized screams that filled the air. The very atmosphere seemed to burn, making each breath a painful struggle. The infernal realm pulsed with an otherworldly energy, its reddish light casting long, twisted shadows across the tortured landscape. Shamir's eyes struggled to adjust to the harsh glare, but as his vision cleared, he began to make out the forms of countless souls trapped in this nightmarish domain. To his horror, he realized that many of these tormented beings were familiar to him. Among the sea of suffering faces, Shamir recognized friends and enemies alike, all subjected to the same cruel fate. The sight of a former comrade writhing in agony sent a shock through Shamir's being. He called out, his voice hoarse and desperate, "Amir!" But his words were swallowed by the roar of the flames, lost in the cacophony of torment that surrounded them. As Shamir stumbled through this realm of retribution, he felt the weight of his past actions bearing down upon him with crushing force. Each step became more difficult, as if the very ground beneath his feet was rejecting his presence. The concept of divine judgment, a common thread in many religious traditions, now manifested before him in all its terrible glory. The psychological impact of this experience was profound. Guilt and remorse, emotions Shamir had long suppressed during his military career, now surged to the forefront of his consciousness with overwhelming intensity. He felt the burden of every life he had taken, every order he had followed without question, pressing down upon his soul. Shamir's journey through this infernal landscape seemed endless, each moment stretching into an eternity of suffering. He witnessed souls being torn apart by their regrets, crushed under the weight of their earthly mistakes. With growing dread, he realized that his own judgment was drawing near. As if in response to this thought, the fiery landscape before Shamir shifted. The flames parted to reveal a small figure standing amidst the chaos. With a jolt of recognition that sent ice through his veins despite the oppressive heat, Shamir realized he was face to face with the child he had killed during a military operation. The child's eyes, filled with an otherworldly wisdom and sadness, bore into Shamir's soul. In that moment, all of Shamir's defenses crumbled. The weight of his actions, the true consequences of his choices, came crashing down upon him with devastating clarity. "Why did you kill me?" The child's simple question cut through the roar of the flames, piercing Shamir's heart like a dagger. He fell to his knees, overwhelmed by the enormity of his actions and the profound injustice he had perpetrated. In this moment of reckoning, Shamir felt himself being stripped bare, his soul laid open before the universe's judgment. The torment he witnessed around him paled in comparison to the agony of facing the true impact of his life's choices. He realized that in this realm, there was no escape from the consequences of one's actions, no hiding from the truth of one's deeds. As Shamir grappled with this devastating revelation, he sensed that his journey through this hellish domain was far from over. The confrontation with the child was but the first step in a process of judgment and perhaps redemption. With trepidation and a glimmer of hope, Shamir prepared himself for what was to come, knowing that the true test of his soul was only beginning. The crushing weight of unmasked reality descended upon Alad Shamir like an avalanche, burying him beneath layers of guilt and regret. In this infernal realm, stripped of all pretense and self-deception, he faced the unvarnished truth of his actions. The faces of those he had affected during his military career flashed before him, each one a stark reminder of the lives he had altered or ended. Shamir's overwhelming sense of remorse threatened to consume him entirely. The child he had killed stood before him, a silent accusation that spoke louder than any words could. In this moment, Shamir experienced the full force of moral injury, a psychological wound that cuts deeper than any physical harm. The concept of moral injury is well documented among combat veterans. It occurs when a soldier's actions in war violate their fundamental beliefs about right and wrong, leading to profound guilt and shame. Shamir now found himself grappling with this devastating condition, his soul laid bare before the universe's judgment. As he confronted the consequences of his choices, Shamir began the painful process of acknowledging every life he had touched. Each memory surfaced with crystal clarity, forcing him to relive moments he had long buried in the recesses of his mind. The weight of these revelations threatened to crush his spirit, yet he knew he had to face them if he ever hoped to find redemption. In this hellish landscape, Shamir realized the true power of confession and accountability. Research has shown that acknowledging one's actions and seeking forgiveness can lead to significant psychological relief and provide a path toward healing. With this understanding, Shamir began to speak, his words echoing through the fiery abyss. I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice growing stronger with each syllable. "I'm sorry for the lives I've taken, for the pain I've caused. I was wrong. I followed orders without question, without considering the consequences of my actions." As he spoke, Shamir felt a subtle shift in the atmosphere around him. The oppressive heat seemed to lessen, the agonized screams fading into the background. Encouraged by this change, Shamir continued his confession. He recounted every life he had affected, every decision that had led him to this moment. With each admission, he felt a small measure of the burden lift from his soul. The process was excruciating, yet strangely cathartic. As Shamir poured out his heart, a glimmer of hope began to take root within him. Could there be a path to redemption, even in this place of eternal torment? The possibility, however faint, gave him the strength to continue his soul-bearing confession. Finally, overwhelmed by the enormity of his actions and the depth of his remorse, Shamir fell to his knees. From the very depths of his being, he cried out for forgiveness. It was a primal sound, raw and desperate, carrying with it all the pain and regret he had ever felt. "Please," he sobbed, "forgive me. I know I don't deserve it, but please, forgive me." As the last echoes of his plea faded away, Shamir became aware of a subtle shift in his surroundings. The oppressive heat of the inferno seemed to recede, replaced by a coolness that soothed his tormented soul. The fiery landscape began to blur and fade, giving way to something entirely unexpected. In this moment of transition, Shamir felt a presence approaching. It was unlike anything he had encountered in this otherworldly realm, radiating a sense of peace and compassion that stood in stark contrast to the judgment and torment he had endured. As he raised his eyes, still glistening with tears of remorse, Shamir found himself face to face with a figure that would challenge everything he thought he knew about forgiveness and redemption. In the depths of despair, a glimmer of hope emerged. As Shamir's anguished cry for forgiveness faded into the infernal landscape, a sudden transformation began to unfold. The oppressive heat and suffocating darkness receded, giving way to a radiance that defied description. From this ethereal light, a figure materialized, its presence so profound that it seemed to bend reality itself. Shamir found himself frozen, his tear-stained face lifted towards this unexpected apparition. As his vision adjusted to the brilliance, he began to discern features that stirred something deep within his soul. The figure before him radiated an aura of peace and compassion that stood in stark contrast to the torment he had endured. With a jolt of recognition that sent shockwaves through his being, Shamir realized he was face to face with Jesus. The encounter plunged Shamir into a maelstrom of conflicting emotions. Awe and reverence warred with fear and unworthiness. How could he, a soldier with blood on his hands, stand before such a divine presence? The weight of his actions pressed down upon him with renewed force, threatening to crush his spirit entirely. This phenomenon of encountering a divine being during near-death experiences is not uncommon. Many who have brushed against the veil of death report similar encounters, often describing them as transformative moments that reshape their entire worldview. The psychological impact of such an experience can be profound, challenging one's deepest beliefs and values. As Shamir grappled with the reality of this divine intervention, he felt a subtle shift within himself. The presence of Jesus seemed to pierce through the layers of guilt and self-loathing, touching something pure and untainted at the core of his being. It was as if a long-forgotten truth was being rekindled, a spark of hope igniting in the darkness of his despair. The air around them seemed to vibrate with anticipation. Shamir could sense that this moment held a significance beyond anything he had ever experienced. What message could this divine figure bring? What truths would be revealed in this extraordinary encounter? As if in response to his unspoken questions, Jesus began to speak. His voice, filled with infinite compassion and wisdom, resonated through Shamir's very being. "You forgot peace," Jesus said, the words echoing with a power that transcended mere sound. These simple words struck Shamir with the force of a revelation. In that instant, he saw his life with crystal clarity. The choices he had made, the path he had followed, and the peace he had sacrificed in the name of duty and conflict. The true meaning of his actions and their consequences unfolded before him, not as a condemnation, but as an invitation to transformation. Jesus continued, speaking of forgiveness and the possibility of redemption. His words wove a tapestry of hope, offering Shamir a chance to redefine his existence. The message was clear. Peace was not just an absence of conflict, but a state of being that began within one's own heart. As Jesus spoke, Shamir felt a profound change stirring within him. The burden of guilt that had weighed him down began to lift, replaced by a sense of purpose he had never known. He realized that his journey through the afterlife, from the city of light to the infernal realm of consequences, had been leading him to this moment of truth and transformation. The encounter with Jesus ignited a spark within Shamir, illuminating a path he had never before considered. As the radiant figure began to fade, Shamir understood that his true journey was only just beginning. The choice to pursue peace, to seek forgiveness, and to dedicate his life to understanding and compassion now lay before him. It was a path that would challenge everything he had ever known, but one that promised a redemption he had never dared to hope for. The return to consciousness hit Alad Shamir like a bolt of lightning. The cold wind struck his face, and the bright sunlight stung his eyes, a stark contrast to the ethereal realms he had just traversed. The battlefield came rushing back into focus, its harsh reality a jarring counterpoint to the profound spiritual journey he had experienced. Shamir gasped, his lungs burning as they filled with the acrid air of war, so different from the rarefied atmosphere of his otherworldly encounter. As he struggled to orient himself, Shamir's mind reeled with the weight of his recent experiences. The heavenly city, the hellish inferno, and the transformative encounter with Jesus all swirled in his thoughts, creating a dizzying kaleidoscope of emotions and revelations. How could he reconcile these profound visions with the mundane world of military operations and battlefield tactics? The challenges faced by those who return from near-death experiences are well documented. Many struggle to integrate their otherworldly insights into their everyday lives, often feeling disconnected from their previous existence. For Shamir, this disconnect was amplified by the stark contrast between the message of peace he had received and the violent reality of his military career. Neurologically, awakening from trauma can be a complex process. The brain, having undergone extreme stress, must recalibrate and reorient itself to the physical world. Shamir found himself grappling with this neurological readjustment, his senses seemingly heightened and yet somehow dulled at the same time. The sounds of the battlefield, once so familiar, now felt alien and discordant. As medical personnel swarmed around him, working to stabilize his physical condition, Shamir's mind raced with questions. How could he continue his life as before, knowing what he now knew? The weight of his past actions pressed heavily upon him, but so too did the promise of redemption and the call to peace that he had received. During his recovery in the hospital, Shamir found himself at a crossroads. Each day brought new challenges as he attempted to reconcile his profound spiritual experience with the expectations of his military career. His fellow soldiers, unaware of the transformation he had undergone, continued to speak of tactics and operations. Yet Shamir found himself increasingly unable to engage in these conversations, his mind constantly returning to the message of peace and forgiveness he had received. Everything I thought I knew about life and faith had changed, Shamir later reflected. I felt a need for forgiveness and recognized the weight of my past mistakes, which I could no longer ignore. This internal struggle became the catalyst for a decision that would alter the course of his life forever. As Shamir's physical wounds healed, his resolve strengthened. The path before him, though fraught with uncertainty, became increasingly clear. With a mixture of trepidation and determination, he made the decision that would define his future. He would leave the military. This choice was not made lightly. Shamir knew he would face skepticism and resistance from his comrades and superiors. The military had been his life, his identity. Yet the call to peace that he had received in that otherworldly realm resonated too strongly to be ignored. He understood that his true mission now lay beyond the confines of military service. As Shamir prepared to embark on this new chapter of his life, he felt a sense of both liberation and apprehension. The world he was stepping into was unfamiliar territory, a landscape where the rules of engagement were vastly different from those he had known. Yet he also felt a profound sense of purpose, a calling to share the message of peace and understanding that had been revealed to him. The journey ahead would be challenging, filled with obstacles both external and internal. But as Shamir took his first steps on this new path, he carried with him the transformative power of his near-death experience, a beacon of hope, guiding him towards a future dedicated to peace and reconciliation. Alad Shamir's transformation from a battle-hardened soldier to an advocate for peace was as unexpected as it was profound. His near-death experience had shaken him to his core, leaving him with an unshakable conviction that his life's purpose had fundamentally changed. As he took his first tentative steps into this new chapter, Shamir found himself navigating unfamiliar territory, both literally and figuratively. The military base that had once been his home now felt alien to him. As he packed up his belongings, each item seemed to carry the weight of his past life. His uniform, once a source of pride, now felt like a costume from a role he could no longer play. Shamir's hands trembled as he folded it for the last time, a physical manifestation of the internal struggle he was facing. His decision to leave the military was met with a mixture of disbelief and skepticism from his former comrades. The camaraderie that had once bound them together now seemed to be fraying at the edges. Hushed whispers followed him through the corridors, and he could feel the weight of questioning gazes upon him. "Has Shamir lost his mind?" they seemed to ask, without words. The very notion of a decorated soldier turning his back on everything he had known to pursue a path of peace seemed incomprehensible to many. Shamir's first public speaking engagement was a nerve-wracking experience. Standing before a small crowd in a community center, he felt exposed and vulnerable. As he began to share his story, his voice trembled with emotion. He spoke of the horrors he had witnessed, the lives he had taken, and the profound transformation he had undergone. The audience listened with a mixture of fascination and skepticism, their expressions a mirror of the internal conflict Shamir himself had faced. The concept of radical personal transformation after profound experiences is not uncommon, yet it often faces resistance from society. Shamir found himself grappling with this resistance daily. Former friends turned their backs on him, labeling him a traitor to the cause they had once fought for together. Even his family struggled to understand the drastic change in his worldview. Despite the challenges, Shamir pressed on. He began to study the works of peace activists and conflict resolution experts, immersing himself in a world that was entirely new to him. The more he learned, the more convicted he became of his new mission. He started small, organizing local dialogues between conflicting communities, creating spaces for understanding and reconciliation. The path of a peace activist in a conflict zone is fraught with danger and disappointment. Shamir faced threats from both sides of the conflict, each viewing his efforts with suspicion. There were nights when he questioned his decision, wondering if he had made a grave mistake in abandoning the certainty of his military career for this tumultuous path. Yet, as time passed, something remarkable began to happen. Shamir's unwavering commitment to peace, coupled with his unique perspective as a former soldier, began to resonate with people. His audiences grew larger, and his message started to spread beyond his immediate community. Journalists sought him out for interviews, curious about the soldier-turned-peacemaker. Shamir's influence as a voice for peace and understanding grew steadily. His story of transformation touched hearts and opened minds. He spoke at universities, religious institutions, and even international peace conferences. Each time he shared his experience, he could see the spark of understanding ignite in the eyes of his listeners. As Shamir's journey continued to unfold, it became clear that his personal transformation was having ripple effects far beyond his own life. His story was challenging long-held beliefs about conflict, redemption, and the possibility of change. It raised profound questions about the nature of reality and the power of individual choice to shape the world. The implications of Shamir's journey were just beginning to be understood, but one thing was certain. The unexpected peace advocate born from the crucible of war was leaving an indelible mark on the world around him. The ripple effect of Alad Shamir's transformation from soldier to peace advocate began to spread like wildfire, touching lives far beyond the borders of his homeland. His story, a testament to the profound impact of near-death experiences, resonated with people from all walks of life. As word of his journey spread, Shamir found himself at the center of a growing movement, his message of peace and reconciliation striking a chord in a world weary of conflict. Shamir's appearances at peace conferences and universities drew increasingly larger crowds. People were captivated by the authenticity of his experience and the depth of his transformation. His words carried the weight of someone who had walked through the fires of war and emerged with a message of hope. Shamir's transformation from a soldier to a peace advocate illustrates the profound societal impact that personal narratives of near-death experiences can have, noted Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, a renowned expert on death and dying. Yet, even as his influence grew, Shamir continued to grapple with internal struggles. The memories of his past actions haunted him, and he often questioned whether he was truly worthy of the platform he had been given. There were nights when the weight of his mission felt overwhelming, and he longed for the simplicity of his former life. But with each dawn came renewed determination, fueled by the knowledge that his story was making a difference. The broader implications of Shamir's near-death experience began to ripple through society. His account challenged long-held beliefs about the nature of consciousness and the possibility of life after death. Scientists and spiritualists alike found themselves drawn into heated debates about the significance of such experiences. Could these glimpses beyond the veil of death hold the key to understanding the very nature of human existence? Research into the potential for individual transformation to effect social change gained new momentum in the wake of Shamir's story. Sociologists and psychologists studied the phenomenon, seeking to understand how one person's profound experience could catalyze shifts in collective consciousness. Shamir's experience emphasizes the role of spiritual awakenings in promoting peace and reconciliation, observed Dr. Raymond Moody, a pioneer in near-death experience research. As Shamir continued his mission, a gradual but unmistakable shift began to occur in the perspectives of those who heard his story. Former soldiers, inspired by his courage, began to question their own roles in perpetuating cycles of violence. Politicians and policymakers, moved by his message, started to explore new avenues for conflict resolution. Even skeptics found themselves reconsidering their stance in the face of Shamir's unwavering conviction. Shamir's narrative serves as a powerful example of how increased awareness about the consequences of violence can lead to a shift in perspectives among those who hear his story, noted Dr. Kenneth Ring, a leading researcher in near-death experiences. This shift was not limited to individuals. Entire communities began to explore new ways of addressing long-standing conflicts, inspired by Shamir's message of forgiveness and reconciliation. As the impact of Shamir's journey continued to unfold, it became clear that his story was more than just a personal tale of transformation. It had become a catalyst for change, challenging deeply ingrained beliefs about the nature of conflict and the possibility of peace. The echoes of his experience resonated through time, promising to shape the course of human understanding for generations to come. Alad Shamir's journey from soldier to peace advocate serves as a powerful testament to the transformative potential that lies within each of us. His near-death experience not only reshaped his own life, but sent ripples of change through society, challenging long-held beliefs about conflict, forgiveness, and the nature of reality itself. As Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross noted, Shamir's transformation illustrates the profound societal impact that personal narratives of near-death experiences can have. The power of Shamir's story lies not just in its extraordinary nature, but in its ability to spark reflection and change in others. It raises profound questions about the choices we make and the consequences that echo through eternity. Are our current actions aligned with our deepest values? What unseen impacts might our decisions have on the world around us? As we contemplate Shamir's journey, we are called to examine our own lives and potential for positive impact. Dr. Raymond Moody observed that Shamir's experience emphasizes the role of spiritual awakenings in promoting peace and reconciliation. Perhaps within each of us lies the seed of a similar awakening, waiting for the right moment to blossom into a force for good in the world. In the end, Shamir's story reminds us that the boundaries between life and death, between the physical and the spiritual, may be more permeable than we once believed. It challenges us to consider the possibility that our reality is far more expansive and interconnected than we dare to imagine. As we reflect on this extraordinary tale, we are left with a lingering question. What unseen realms might we touch through our own choices and actions?